How would a big media company start in the arena of big data if they haven't already quite started?
It's a great question. And one of the reasons why we wrote the primer actually was to help at least market research professionals jumpstart that process and be catalysts within their own organization. I think the first thing they have to realize is that it doesn't sit within one division or one piece of the company, that harnessing big data, finding the big data solutions, knowing what data sets you need or what data sets you want or what data sets you even have. All of those things require not just the senior researcher that may be at the company, but also their technology officers. Sometimes they have information officers. You need to be able to look at your contracts for data. So, I think step one is finding the right people in the organization to get together and realize it's not a one-person effort, but probably a team. And also realizing that it's not about just the data, but it's about how you deliver that data, have capabilities to analyze the data, so there's technology involved. And then really taking an inventory of what you have in-house to start with and where you think there are gaps in your knowledge that you want to add. And there's probably a whole series of steps after that, but that's where I would start.
The key word that I took from what Stacey said was team, because there's not an individual within the company now or a specialist outside the company who has all the knowledge and the expertise to execute these studies. That it really requires people who are trained to deal with data analytics, data scientists, and the traditional researchers who understand what the data represent, how they're gathered, how they're used within the organization. So the skills for successful big data projects, data analytic projects, are as much collaborative skills as they are technical skills of machine learning, artificial intelligence, et cetera, et cetera. So when Stacey said it's a team, it's a team.
From my experiences, particularly with my work at Set-Top Box Data many years ago, I found that many media companies are siloed in terms of the research functions and responsibilities, but also digital versus traditional. How can a company overcome the silos, or do you think that companies now are breaking down the silos?
I think that companies are breaking down the silos. I think certainly 10 years ago, even on the agency side, our business was very siloed, right? You had the people who did digital media versus the people who did traditional media. Arguably, the pendulum keeps swinging one way or the other. But within the media companies, they have, because they deal with the consumer who's the fan, they know that a fan is going to come to their content and their product in any number of ways, through any number of doors. And as much as we want to structure our sales organizations to work with our buying organizations, we've seen both sides of that equation change the way they structure. So where you used to have very siloed traditional buyers, digital buyers, you now have digital buyers who now oversee traditional buying, and there's much more of a mixing of skill sets. And you see that on the media side now as well. And it's a question of where your revenue streams are going to come from and whether you're going to value your inventory differently, I think, is the hump that they have to get over on the media side. But more and more, and particularly as measurement gets better, even traditional measurement, you will see more blending of those different divisions within media.
Something that's occurred to me recently is that we've seen more and more the increased value of data. Data are now recognized as a strategic asset throughout the country. And I believe we've not seen an increased value of the traditional researcher in the job at a lot of companies, particularly on the agency side, but throughout. And there's a contradiction in that a lot of the influence is coming from the data scientist. So the opportunity that I see is for that researcher to break out of whatever silo he or she feels himself in, pick up some basic skills, and if they don't know where to start, the primer's a good place to start. It's not sufficient, but it's not designed for that. But somewhere the traditional researcher has the opportunity to increase his or her value to the company consistent with the increased value of the data.
I would agree with that. And the other thing I would add is that we are now at a point with big data where we're beyond defining the terms, we're beyond knowing that it's here. We're beyond knowing we have to jump in and get into it. Now that all of that seems to be laying its foundation and we get into the weeds of this, I think issues of data quality, the sourcing, all of that is going to become more and more important. And the people who are really well equipped to get into that conversation are the traditional market researchers. So we have a lot to add, particularly now. And if we can hold hands with data scientists and really help them together, we can create greater products for our companies.
I recently had lunch with a head of sales for a big network group who's asked me what data sets might lie in their company at this time that they could maximize. And it seemed like an interesting question to me. I think that there are people who are not in research, who may not be as well versed in big data, that are searching for ways that they can leverage what they already have. What would you suggest for a company like that to bring in non-researchers into the discussion?
What a perfect. It's a perfect way of setting up why we created the primer to begin with, right? Because it's not just for researchers. I think we wrote it in a way that it would be for salespeople, anyone who really works in our industries. And I think that many people don't realize that the data we've been working with day in and day out for the last 20, 30 years is actually pretty big. The Nielsen data sets in and of themselves are enormous. What we're talking about with big data now is that we just know so much more about what consumers are doing because consumers are leaving a digital trail. There are these digital breadcrumbs everywhere of what we've been doing. And the challenge is how do you collect that and have that make sense for whatever organization you're in. So they have to look at, particularly in their digital products, what kind of registration data they have, what kind of syndication data they have. And then there's lots of data companies out there that are collecting consumer information that create layers of insight about those folks. And they have to decide with their own teams, their own researchers, their own data scientists they may have there, what's going to be the most useful for how they want to sell their products going forward.
There are all kinds of data that research people work with. And as we're beginning to confront this big data and how can we in any way deal with combining survey data with big data, there's another whole area of data that researchers have worked with, which is qualitative data. We're used to working with focus groups or small groups, ethnographies like that, small numbers. And we've learned a way to integrate and glean information from less rigorously drawn quantitative sources. And so it's the same sort of expanded thinking that's required to be able to combine new sources of data. And a lot of the big data are, as Stacey was saying, breadcrumbs that are left by consumers or other ways that we can reach out to bring data in. So the researcher and the head of sales is aware of the structured survey sorts of Nielsen data, MRI, etc. But there's a whole other world of data that we're only now gathering and learning to analyze. And that's the fun.